Yo, what is up? We're back, part 10 of our full artifact card review. This time we're going to do something a little bit different near the end of the video. I'm actually going to go back and look at a few cards that I've rated previously in this series that I've actually changed my mind on in at least a small way between now and when I rated them originally, because I believe it's very important to be able to admit when you're wrong and swap your opinions when they're no longer really working out for you. And there are like 3 or 4 cards over the course of this like 10-part series so far that I actually have very much warmed up to in this time. Anyway, starting with like the actual new card review. It occurs to me that I haven't been saying what each star rating corresponds to at the start of these videos because I'm a bad YouTuber. But specifically, 1 star means the card will basically see no constructed competitive play. These are the constructed cards. 2 stars means the card will probably see no competitive play. 2.5 stars means the card might see competitive play. 3.0 means it will see some competitive play at least, although maybe like niche anti-meta swap options, or maybe like in a lower tier deck. 4 stars means consistent competitive play, and 5 stars means like auto include or a powerful build around card. For draft, basically anything that you end up picking that suits your colors later on into the draft is going to be included in your deck if it's 3 stars or higher, and even a lot of 2.5s will for sure end up being in your final deck. Okay, right off the bat, Steel Strength, this green spell for 4 mana, allows you to reduce the attack of 1 unit by 4 and increase the attack of another unit by 4. This is a pretty powerful like kind of combat trick sort of thing, which it's like the closest thing to like a combat trick. I don't know if that term really applies, but it's fine. But basically the idea is it just makes combat more favorable for you. This is a pretty balanced card. It's definitely not something you're unhappy to see in your deck. 3.5 stars for draft, 3 stars for constructed. I do think it might fit into something like a 1 of tech slot in like a mono green deck or something like that. I don't think it has like amazing options for like higher tier decks in constructed, just because you're gonna see decks that demand like a higher degree of synergy than this, but this is a very valuable card. Note that when you compare it to Ursa's signature card falls off like crazy to this, and Rage, which gives +4 armor and +4 attack. This is basically better in every way. You can like split the buff however you want. You're not restricted to using it on a red hero, which is a huge downside to Ursa's and Rage, and it's just like so much more versatile. This is a very solid card. Next up, Pit Fighter of Voyage, I guess that's how you say that. At 4 mana, this black creep at 2/8 starting stat line will simply gain +2 attack permanently whenever a neighboring ally dies, which can be a creep or a hero. So this is an alright card. I would say 2.5 stars for draft. 2 stars for constructed. I could see 2.5, but honestly I'm gonna leave it at 2 for now because it's just not really the kind of card you necessarily want to run in a format that demands a higher degree of synergy. It is solid, but it's really more of a draft card that you will run in constructed. You're probably more likely to run Tyler Estate Censor over this, which has the same mana cost and stat line, but reduces the enemy's mana on their tower, so it might be a better aggro option or something like that. Typically, you want to find an opportunity to play Pit Fighter when something next to it is dying immediately, and it'll come out at 4 attack when that happens, which is pretty good, but it's still like kind of a low synergy card. Maybe if the like black-green Ravenous Mass Rick's deck takes off in the future, you might be seeing some Pit Fighters there. I'm going to stress at this point of the video the difference between a draft rating and a constructed rating. This is really important. Draft is rating the power level of cards, and constructed is rating the probability that the card will see play in a competitive deck, right? That's a very important distinction. So when I say Pit Fighter is like a 2-star rating in constructed, that doesn't mean it bad, right? Like if you want to play it, or maybe if I'm referring to a card that has a cheaper rarity, it could be a very good budget option, right? And if you're just looking for the power level of any card in particular, refer absolutely to the draft rating for it. So for me, this is a 3 stars in draft, 2 stars, you know what, 2.5. for constructed. Specifically, Shield of Aquila is something that is, you know, not high synergy. It's not super high demand for constructed, and it doesn't like keep all of your stuff so ridiculously alive as better options like Stonehall Cloak. It's no Clashream Hourglass that just like hampers your opponent's game plan, but it's a very high potential value card. There may be decks in constructed that might be able to slot this as like a 1 of or a 2 of. It does tech well against certain options like Lich. Lich has Chain Frost, which is very powerful, and I have a feeling we'll be talking about Lich later on in the video. Okay, spoiler alert, I'm just gonna say right now, Lich is one of the heroes I like, definitely underrated at first. Next up, another item, Assassin's Veil. The image of this has been around for a while, but we recently got an updated effect for it. So the equipped hero has +4 health, and on a 2-turn cooldown, you are able to choose a combat target for any equipped hero on the trinket slot. This is 6 gold. So if you'll note, this is actually a very similar item to phase boots, which allow you to actually do basically the same thing, but with a slightly different active, which is phase boots allows you to swap a hero's position, right? Right off the bat, Assassin's Veil is basically, let's say, a 3 stars in draft. This is actually a very solid draft card, like Shield of Aquila. In constructed, this will never see play. I'll have to call this a 1 star for no other reason. Then there's better ways of being able to choose combat targets, and ultimately phase boots is basically a better version of this card. If you need to choose a combat target, well, phase boots just gives you more ability to swap with what you want. There's just more you can do with phase boots because you are able to choose a combat target and much more. And then you've got Defensive Stance. Defensive Stance is a red 2-mana spell. Give a hero +3 armor this round. This card is basically ass. I really... okay, I'll just say right now, we're not going to waste too much time on this. This is 1.5 star draft, 1 star constructed. You don't play this card. It's not even really a draft card. Usually bad constructed cards are often like good draft cards. This card is an exception to that. Don't play this card. Okay, next up we've got Caught Unprepared. This is actually one of the cheekier effects in the game. I love the design of this card. This is a green 4-mana spell, and you can simply stun any hero until they equip an item. So you can use this on heroes that have equipped items already, and until they equip a new item, they will remain stunned throughout multiple turns. Like, they're stunned for the rest of the game until they equip an item, which is pretty neat, right? If in theory you stun a hero that has 3 full equipment slots already, as an example, your opponent will literally have to override one of the old ones by deleting it with a new equipment item just to be able to unstun their hero, which is kind of cheeky. I will say this is one of the cards that does in fact end up looking a lot better than it actually is. In reality, items are very cheap often. This would be good in draft if draft wasn't flooded with, you know, good players putting a ton of 3 gold items in decks. Draft is just, you know, you start your draft deck building process by putting like 3 Traveler's Cloaks and 2 Short Swords in your deck. Sometimes you even run leather armor, like, and there's not even that much wrong with that. But Caught Unprepared really falls off in that environment of just like so many cheap items, and your opponent might be able to see that you have it anyway in like a visible deck tournament format. In constructed, you can kind of see combo potential for this in the future. For me, this is going to be a 1.5 star draft card and a 2-star constructed card. I would like the potential for this to be achieved in constructed one day, but the game isn't really set up in a way for this to be amazing yet. Ultimately, it's too inconsistent. It's too bad when you top deck it later, because like after the first 2 turns of the game, pretty much every deck will constantly have at least 1 item in their hand at all times, and just wasting this for that opportunity doesn't really do that much. And the third thing that's wrong with this is stunning a hero is not always even like incredibly impactful. Like if you stun them for like 1 or 2 turns, if they're, let's say, like a fairly squishy hero, like, you know, maybe you stun an axe, yeah, you get to keep like 2 creeps alive, but they're still casting red spells on their other lanes. They don't really mind that much, and he's not really dying. You stun a blue hero, yeah, I mean, maybe you can kind of kill it, but I mean, the opponent is still able to kind of develop their early game options with other heroes, despite having one hero out of commission early. They don't really mind that so much. It's better to lock down options in the late game, and this card can only ever really be good in the early game. Next up, Jook. Jook is actually a pretty neat card. For 1 mana, this little green spell will allow you to swap 2 neighboring allies with each other in terms of their position, and sometimes this is exactly what you need to get a slightly better combat. This is actually fairly acceptable in draft. It's basically a very bad version of Blue's Cunning Plan, but hey, Cunning Plan's a very good card, so it's okay to be a bad version of Cunning Plan. No, but you can't hold someone to that standard. Every card's worse than Cunning Plan. Well, not every card, actually. A lot of cards are better, but Jook is okay. Jook is worse. So with Jook, 2.5 for draft, you will actually be curving into your deck around like half the time. This is definitely like something that, depending on your draft, you might take one of, or maybe leave by the wayside. For constructed, I will put this at 1 stars. This is definitely not a constructed level card. It's really just a draft filler. And then of course we've got Divine Intervention. This green 5-mana spell will give your allies damage immunity on that board, on that lane for that round. This is great. It curves the 5, which is something that a lot of cards in drafts just don't really do. Like, there's a lot of fairly bad 5-mana cards, and therefore things that are able to curve 5 and be decent are very solid. Immediately 3.5 for draft, 2 stars for constructed. Is conceivably could kind of almost see play, but it really is much more of a draft card. That being said, this is very solid. You're never unhappy to see one of these. These will basically always make the cut for your decks that are running green. Cleansing Rite. 4-mana green spell, purge your opponent's effects from a hero. So you can use this in one of 2 ways. You are able to purge negative debuffs if your opponent negatively debuffs your heroes, and you can then use Cleansing Rite on them to take off those negatives. Or if your opponent uses positive buffs on their heroes, then you can use Cleansing Rite to take those off. And sometimes these can range to very powerful, like Time of Triumph. Unfortunately, this is a really bad card. It's basically a much worse version of Abaddon's Aphotic Shield. And if there ever does come a time in Constructed where, you really need to tech in like a Purge effect, you could actually consider running Abaddon, but you would run Abaddon much more so before this card. And for that reason, this is 1 star in Constructed, 1 star in draft. This is very much a do not play. I will say about Purge effects, they are pretty limited in the game right now, even with the higher value Purge effect that is Abaddon Sig. Even when you purge off something like Time of Triumph, it does feel cute. It's like, oh, I can counter this 8-mana win condition with this 2-mana little green card. But in reality, like, if your opponent has timed, they'll be timing 2 or 3 heroes. Maybe you can peel it off of 1 hero, but you're often in the late game at that point anyway, and time ultimately just gives such a ridiculous inevitability to the outcome of the game in the next 2 turns or so, that if you aren't winning on that turn, peeling out of time for 1 hero just doesn't make a difference. So Purge doesn't really have great positions in this meta right now. There's not like the super high value buff that you're actually really countering with Purge effects at all. In the future, you might see Abaddon. And speaking of things you might see in the future, this next card is not one of them. This is Rolling Storm at 3 mana. This blue spell allows you to deal 2 damage to all towers in all lanes, including your own. Okay, so this is not really a real card. I will, however, say, I can start by saying this is 1 star in draft and constructed. I will, however, say it does have synergy with Unearthed Secrets, because you can damage your own tower and get the Unearthed Secrets effect off, even if your opponent isn't hitting you. Checkmate. And then you've got Avernus' Blessing. This is very similar to Combat Training. Green 3-mana spell. Give a unit +2 attack. You can use it on a unit instead of a hero, like Combat Training. Unfortunately, that's basically useless. There's not really going to be very many situations where you're going to want to do that. This is ultimately just a draft filler card. You will actually play this in draft sometimes. 2.5 stars in draft. Definitely gonna have to be a 1-star constructed, and it's just not really synergistically on the level. You'll note I'm rating a lot of cards 1-star constructed, and if you're new to card games, this is kind of how they often end up working. Constructed metas demand like very high synergy, like combo cards to be played in like the competitive decks, and this is just like the competitive star value of it, which is it's not good. Don't play this in constructed. And then the last one for this part is Whispers of Madness. This is wow. We're getting all of these kinds of cards out of the way at once. This is a 2-mana blue spell, stun an enemy this round and stun allied heroes in all lanes this round. So this is one of the worst rares in the game. Man, it feels bad getting like 4 bad cards in a row, because I just feel like I'm just dogging on these cards, but this is not a good card, okay? So first of all, you can only ever really play this in the right lane, and when you do, you're actually kind of mitigating the downside, right? Because, you know, the stunned allied heroes in the lanes you've already played on, that's fine. And that's cool. I mentioned on Artifaction that I liked the design of this card, because that's something that, you know, by definition, you can kind of only really play in the right lane. Unfortunately, there's just no way to get value out of this card. I mean, if there's eventually some kind of combo piece in the future, which is like, do X every time a unit gets stunned, well, then this card could be amazing, because you trigger like 6 stuns and it can go off. Until then, though, this really is a 1-star for both constructed and draft. And now, as promised, a few cards from previous segments that I have changed my ratings on, at least a small amount. First and foremost, maybe the biggest one, Lich. I originally rated Lich as a 3-star card, which was kind of a meta prediction. When I set out to do these ratings, I started out with some like meta predictions, which is like I rated Lich and Kana a little bit lower just because I figured they might do worse in the meta that they kind of came out into, and like what I expect to be this like patch 1 meta. I think that's not really a great way to evaluate card rankings, though, because predicting metas is often going to be kind of inaccurate whenever anybody does it. There's so much that goes into that, and especially with Artifact, where, you know, it's a brand new game, nobody really knows how things will be. I think it's just a bad idea to try to bring meta predictions into it, and beyond that, even if you predict accurately, well, there's still going to be future expansions, and Lich is fundamentally a powerful card. So for now, we're going to bump Lich up to 4 stars draft, 4 stars constructed. I'm kind of almost inclined to push 4.5. I think that's maybe a little excessive. This is a powerful constructed level hero. The initiative and just the general value on his sig is great. It is a little bit counterable. We'll have to see like if there are ways to kind of like tech in some armor stuff in the future. And Lich will definitely feel like he'll get worse if there's kind of more counters that are just low cost that can kind of spring up, because armor is a really big problem for his sig, but he is just a very powerful black hero. You can combo him with like a black-blue attrition style deck, and his stall potential really helps with a build like that, and you can build some stuff to kind of ramp into him as well. The second card I'm adjusting my score on is Gank. Gank is a card I rated, I believe, 3.5 before, which is a fairly respectable rating. I'm going to bump that up to 4. This card is something that is actually very hard to use on almost every black hero. Specifically, the only reason why this card is a 4-star card is because Bounty Hunter and Phantom Assassin exist and are 2 of the biggest black staples. In fact, you run these in most black decks. They are the core of like the kind of payday build, which is a lot of what people are running right now. If you're running the payday build, you're running Bounty Hunter and PA off the flop, and you're running probably something like 2 ganks, possibly 3. They are pretty powerful in that deck and better than pickoff, provided you are running both Bounty Hunter and Phantom Assassin. The reason I rated this like a little bit lower to start is specifically because you can really only use it with these 2 heroes. Like trying to use this with like Sniper or Riley or unnamed black hero that I can't mention yet, like it's not really going to do incredibly well, but because Bounty and PA are so good, this ranks higher. Beyond that, this will only get better over time as beefier black heroes are introduced. Like if they introduce black heroes that are on the level of Bounty Hunter and Phantom Assassin, maybe even better, well, this card will get better to scale with those beefier black heroes. And then lastly, And this might come as a bit of a surprise to you guys. I mean, some of you guys are rolling your eyes at my last two ones. I know. Some of you guys are like, well, duh, Lich is good. Yeah, you're right. Okay. But lastly, Lyin. Lyin, I think, is actually definitely not what I'd call like a super constructed level card, but he might actually find niche play in like some kind of cheesy aggro combo deck. I've been experimenting with some things like that, Rivering Lyin, and it's actually kind of okay. I'm gonna have to put him up to 2.5 stars for constructed. And this was off of my previous rating of 1.5 stars for constructed. This is not a good card to run in draft. I would pretty much never run this card in draft, just because Riley is better and you have Riley as an option, typically. But, you know what? In constructed, maybe Mana Drain can kind of find its proper spot. Anyway, that's it for part 10 of my full card review. I think I'm gonna like start doing this at the end, where like, you know, I start kind of, you know, if there's one or two cards that I've kind of changed my mind on, even like minorly, like I only bumped up Gank like 0.5, but you know, these ratings still matter. I want things to be as accurate as possible. So at the ends of these videos, for the rest of the series, which hopefully can't go on too longer. I mean, they've revealed most of the cards at this point, right? I think I'm almost done. I think I'm almost free, but until then, I will be, you know, updating any card ratings that I happen to change in that time in these videos. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.